Okay, so welcome to the Tier 2 Choice webinar. My name is Corey Cox. I am part of the education team here at URS, and I have here with me Don Dockenhausen, one of the URS retirement planning advisors who will be presenting to us today. Just a few housekeeping items to be aware of before we get started. We want to ensure that you're able to remain engaged in the presentation today, so we provided just a few tools that will help you understand the benefits available. Please note that this presentation, this webinar, is for those individuals in the Tier 2 retirement system. This includes individuals that were hired after July 1st of 2011. If you are in the public safety or firefighter Tier 2 system, we will be going over the same information, similar information as what you have available to you. But just be aware that the concepts are the same, and we do have a handout there that is available to you to upload as well. Speaking of the uploads, we have attached the files that refer to the Tier 2 system and the savings plans that we offer at URS right there at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. These handouts could potentially be beneficial to you as a reference throughout this presentation, and Don will make mention of those as well. We'd also love your participation throughout the session today. If you have any questions, please be sure to ask there in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We have people here to help answer those questions. In addition, we'll be asking some questions of our own to make sure that you're paying attention. So please participate in these poll questions as they help us gauge who's with us today and also your level of understanding of the concepts that will be discussed. With that being said, let me introduce to you Dawn Dockenhausen, one of the URS retirement planning advisors. She's been with URS for just over 3 years now and has many additional years of financial experience. So with that being said, Dawn, go ahead and take it over.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to go through, and we'll go ahead and get started with the webinar. And by the way, just remember, if you haven't downloaded those files, those are in the bottom right-hand corner. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a quick poll question. So you should see that question on your screen. And so the question is, how long have you worked in public employment in the state of Utah? So if you wouldn't mind just selecting your answer, we'll kind of get an idea of what we're looking at time-wise. Okay, we've got a few kind of in every category. Okay, so if you're under 1 year, the Tier 2 choice applies as far as still being able to make the choice of which system you want to be in. If you're over 1 year, then you'll want to specifically pay attention to the system that you have chosen or the hybrid plan that you would have been defaulted to. Okay, so before we get started on going over the Tier 2 retirement system, I want you to be thinking about what your retirement goals are. That's kind of the point of planning for retirement, is that someday maybe you want to wake up and not go to work, but you want to have some resources to be able to travel or spend time with family, volunteer, and you're still going to have expenses or bills to pay, and we're going to be talking about what kind of resources you can plan for and save for now so that someday you can truly retire and be able to do some of those things that you may want to do other than go to work every day. So be thinking of that. That's kind of the motivation behind doing some of these things. So when it comes to retirement income, we use this analogy of a three-legged stool, and the legs represent the different income sources that you can have. The two that we're going to be talking about today are individual savings and possibly pension, depending on which choice you make within the Tier 2 plan. Social Security could also be a source of income in retirement. We're not going to specifically talk about that today, and you may actually have other sources or other legs to your stool. Maybe you would have rental income or part-time wage income or other sources that could help to supplement these sources that we'll be talking about today as part of the Tier 2 plan. So be thinking about how what you can do and what your employer is doing can help provide some of those retirement income sources in retirement. Okay, as part of the Tier 2 system, if you look at that handout, there are two choices that there are two options that you can make within the Tier 2 plan. And those choices are being in the hybrid system or the defined contribution plan. As Corey mentioned, you are in the Tier 2 plan if you were hired after July 1 of 2011. And the Tier 2 plan is that the employer is going to contribute 10% of your gross wages above and beyond what they pay you towards one of these plans. On the brochure that you've downloaded, the hybrid plan is the top section and the defined contribution plan is the bottom section. And we're going to talk about the hybrid plan first. You do have 1 year to decide where you want that 10% to go. And by the way, if you're in the public safety or firefighter system, it's a 12% contribution instead of a 10% contribution because of the differences in when you can retire. There is a 4-year vesting period, whether you're public employee or public safety firefighter. So we're talking about the employer's contribution, that 10 or 12% contribution. You do have to stay employed for a total of 4 years before you can have access to that benefit, or before you would qualify for that benefit. So let's talk about the top section first, the hybrid system. What the hybrid system does is it, as the name entails, it combines two things. It combines a pension with a 401k contribution. Most of the 10% or 12% public safety firefighter would be buying years of service credit towards the pension. And what a pension is a monthly income stream that will start from the time you apply until you pass away. And so a pension would work kind of like the way that Social Security works now. If you have a parent or grandparent that's taking Social Security, they start getting a check, and then they get that as long as they live. That's what a pension is. Pensions are based on formulas, whereas a 401k, that would actually be a set dollar amount that you would have discretion as to how and when you spend it. So if you choose the hybrid system for the employer contribution, most of the employer contribution is going to be buying years of service credit towards that pension formula, and whatever is not needed to buy those years of service would be contributed to the 401k. So here's the pension formula, and this is in that little grayish box in the middle of your hybrid section on your handout. The pension formula is years of service credit. And by the way, for every 1 year that you complete, you get 1 year of service credit. And you get that service credit contributed every pay period. So if you get paid 12 times a year, you get 1/12 of a year of service credit every pay period. If you get paid 26 times a year, every other week, you would get 1/26 of the year, or 0.038 of service credit as part of the formula. So you'd have your years of service credit. When you retire, we look and see what that number is, and that can be a fraction hanging off full years of service. So maybe you would have 25.238 or 15.127. You get paid, or you earn service credit through the days that you work. So you would get service credit to the exact last day of employment. Whatever that number is, that's multiplied by 1.5%. That's a replacement percentage of your highest 5-year average. And so it says final average salary, but if you look at the parentheses, it's really the average of your highest 5 years. So if you have a total of, say, 25 years in the pension system, we would find your highest 5. We would average those, and that would be the bottom number of that formula. So there's an example in the handout of someone who worked 35 years. 35 times 1.5% is 52.5%. If for all 35 years we found those highest 5 years, and in this example the person's highest 5 was 40,000, 52.5% of 40,000 is 21,000 a year. Pensions are paid monthly, and so we would take that annual benefit of 21,000, divide it by 12, and in this example this person would get $1,750 a month. Now, everybody that's on this webinar, if you choose the hybrid plan, everybody would probably get a different payment, because unless you all work the exact same number of years and have the exact same salary history, your payment wouldn't be the same. And so I just want to point out this is just an example. And so you could kind of think in your head, okay, I plan to work 15 years or 20 years, and maybe you don't know exactly what your highest 5 years are going to be, but if you look at what you're getting paid now and maybe some an assumption on a salary increase over the years, you might be able to kind of get an idea of that. And in a minute, I'm going to mention a calculator that can help you with that. Okay, so if you choose the hybrid plan, when can you qualify for this benefit? So if you look in your handout, this is on the top right corner. With pensions, there are age and years of service required to be able to qualify. So unless you have a whole lot of years, you pretty much have to be in your 60s to qualify. Or if you start fairly young, in your early 20s, if you have at least 35 years, you can apply without being in your 60s. Now there are two middle options there, age 62 with 10 or age 60 with 20 years, where if you don't work as many years or start a little bit later, you can still qualify, but there would be a reduction on your pension if you apply before age 65 or without having 35 years. So as kind of a general rule of thumb, if you're considering the hybrid plan, which most of your money would be coming from the pension, just keep in mind it's probably going to be in your best interest if you're not planning on working 35 years to at least be age 65 before you apply. And 65 is kind of an average retirement age in the United States now anyways because of some other resources, Medicare, Social Security, things like that. But just keep that in mind that if you work 10 years from, say, age 35 to 45, you wouldn't be able to apply for the pension yet. You would have those years, and you would keep those years, but if you left the state of Utah or you left public employment, you would just need to call us, around age 65, and then we would figure out that pension payment for you. That pension payment does have a cost of living adjustment. It is not guaranteed, but you can get an increase annually in your payments. And remember, these payments are coming monthly, so each month you could get, or you would get an increase for the upcoming 12 months of payments. That increase is based on something called the CPI. It's the Consumer Price Index, and this is it's the federal government's measure of inflation. And so basically they're looking at how much were things increasing in price across the United States, and they come up with a percentage, and that percentage is the CPI. That CPI, or Consumer Price Index, that measure of inflation, that is what is used to figure out the increase that you would get in your pension each year. That increase is put in place on the month of your retirement date. So if you retire in May of 2050, in May of 2051 is when the COLA, or the cost of living adjustment, would happen. In May of 2052, May of 2053, et cetera. So every May or whatever month you end up retiring is when, for the future 12 months, that cost of living adjustment could happen. And again, it's not guaranteed, but it can go up to 2.5% per year based on inflation. So in that example where in the handout where the example was $17.50 a month, that would be indicative of year one. 10 years down the road, let's say you retired at 65, now you're 75, your payment most likely is not $17.50 a month anymore. It might be, and I'm just throwing out a number, maybe it's $19.72 or $18.91. I'm just throwing out a number, but just gives you an idea that payment can increase each year. Okay, so back to the contribution rate. Now remember, if you're in public safety or fire, you're looking at a 12% contribution instead of a 10%. Public employees, that would be if you work for a city, state, county, school district, water district, special service district, you're at the 10% contribution. The way that is split out between buying the years of service credit for the pension formula and what goes into the 401k is reassessed every fiscal year. And this is a really good thing so that we can make sure that enough is being collected to make those promised payments in the pension. And the amount that's needed for the pension is going to be most of that 10% employer contribution. For the fiscal year July 1, 2018 to June 30th, 2019, the amount of the 10% that's needed to buy the years of service credit is 8.85% of the 10. That is subtracted from 10% to figure out what is going to be contributed to the 401k. So for the next 12 months, 1.15% of the 10, so that's 1.15% of your salary, would go to the 401k as an employer contribution. So if you're in the hybrid plan and you have this breakout of the 10%, on your statement for the pension piece, you will not see a dollar amount. What you will see is the amount of service credit that has been purchased and your salary history, because those are the two things that are going into the formula. We don't know in total how much your pension is worth to you until you actually pass away, because we can add up how much you got paid out, and that's what your pension was worth to you. So you will never see a specific dollar amount attributed to the pension. Whereas for the 401k piece, you would see a specific dollar amount, and maybe it's 50,000 or 100,000 by the time you retire, and then you can spend that according to the IRS rules when you're eligible, and you can spend that at your discretion. Now that pension rate, as I mentioned, is reassessed each year. So here's another example. Let's say the pension rate goes to 9 from 8.5 or 8.85 to 9. Again, that would be subtracted from the 10%, and in this example, 1% would go to the 401k. Now let's say that something happens. Maybe we don't have great years in the economy. We have a deep depression or recession that goes on for years and years, and in order for that pension to keep getting paid out at those promised amounts, there needs to be a little bit more that is contributed. And so let's say that the folks that come back and assess the need for that come back and say, okay, we need 11% of salary. The employer is only on the hook for 10. And so if 11 is what is needed, obviously there's going to be nothing left over for a 401k contribution, but we still need an extra 1% so that those pension payments can be made. And if that were the case, then that 1% would be required from the employee for that 12-month period of time until it was reassessed to see if that would still need to continue or not. So just keep that in mind. This Tier 2 system, the hybrid system, has been around since 2011. The pension rate has always been in the 7 to 8% range, mostly in the 8% range. And so it hasn't gone above 10, but that is something that could possibly happen. We don't necessarily anticipate that being a likely possibility, but just keep that in mind. And by the way, if you were having 11% contributed towards retirement and you were doing 1% and the employer was doing 10, it still, might be a pretty good deal. And by the way, we do encourage you to contribute to your retirement in general above and beyond what we're talking about today as far as what the employer is doing. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, what happens if you pass away before you retire and you've chosen the hybrid plan? Well, there is a one-time payment of 75% of your highest annual salary that would go to your named beneficiary. This is one of the reasons why you definitely want to get your URS account set up, because there is a death benefit associated with this retirement plan, and there's a death benefit that would be paid to the beneficiary that you have named on our website. And if you have other insurances or benefits through your employer and have named beneficiaries, those are not going to transfer over to our website. So you definitely want to make sure that you get that beneficiary name. And then there could be a continuing benefit for your spouse if qualified. And those qualifications are basically if you've worked for at least 15 years or if you have met one of those age and number of year qualifications but just had not applied. And by the way, this is not mentioned in your handout, but that monthly payment as part of the hybrid plan can actually continue if you choose to on your retirement application. That monthly payment can continue for a spouse. So there are two people who can benefit from that monthly payment, and you don't have to worry about this too much because it wouldn't be a decision that you would make until you would retire. But if you have a spouse at retirement, you can actually take a little bit less in your monthly payment. And if you pass away and your spouse lives for another 15 years, they could actually continue to get your pension payment or a portion of that until they passed away. So that's one of the benefits of the hybrid system. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, if you're kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to work a certain number of years and I don't know what my high five would be, but maybe I want to try to do an estimate of what that might look like. If you go to urs.org, right across the homepage, there's a blue ribbon that has some links. If you click on the calculators link, on the left-hand side of the screen, there will be a section called URS Pension Plans. And if you select the Retirement Benefit Estimate Calculator, there will be some inputs, and then you can run your estimate. You're going to have to make some assumptions on when you're going to retire, how many years you'd have. You put in your current salary and assumed salary increase rate so that the calculator can find those high five. And then there's an inflation adjustment so that you can put it in current dollars, today's dollars versus future dollars, so you'll have an idea of what that would look like. And you can run that calculator several times. It just gives you an idea of what that pension might look like. And I would highly encourage you to do that if you're in your first year and you need to make a decision on whether or not you think you may choose the hybrid plan or the 401k only plan. Okay, so we finished talking about the hybrid plan. Now we're going to move to the bottom section of the handout where it talks about the defined contribution plan, or basically all of the employer contribution, the 10% for public employees, 12% for public safety and fire, would go to a 401k. So the amount that you have in retirement is a little bit, I would say probably it's a little more tricky to determine because it's going to be based on a couple things that we don't know. Number one would be the investment performance. That 10% contribution would go into some investment choices. And those choices, depending on if you're aggressive or conservative, if they're in the stock market or not, they could go up or down based on that investment performance. We can always look back and historically know how the stock market or investments have done, but we really don't know going forwards how they may perform. And so that's one of the things that might be a little bit harder to predict, not only for the time that you're working, but for the time that you're retired and using that money. It could still be in those investments and could still, have growth or loss depending on those investment choices. If you make a higher salary, 10% of a higher salary is a higher amount. If you have a lower salary, 10% over a lower amount would be a lower contribution. So for example, if you were making $40,000 a year, 10% of your salary would be $4,000 for the year. That's what the employer piece of the Tier 2 system in the defined contribution plan would be. All right, let's go ahead and, oh, nope, sorry, I thought there was a poll question, but not quite yet. If you pass away before you retire as part of the, actually, let me just mention one other thing. On the 401k option, one of the other things that we don't know is how long you would need that 401k to last. Let's say you retire at 65 and you plan on living maybe 20 years. And so you have to be really prudent in how you would spend, let's say you had $400,000 in your 401k. You would want to make sure that you didn't spend that too soon so that, at age 78, you didn't run out of money. And most people don't know how long they're going to live. And so you'd want to probably plan for maybe a worst case scenario where you might live longer than expected, and just make sure that that 401k is there for you for all of those years. But there's no guarantee that it will, because you have total control as to how and when you spend it. Okay, if you pass away before retiring and you have chosen the 401k only or defined contribution plan for the employer contribution, you still have that one-time payment that would go to a beneficiary of 75% of your highest annual salary. So for example, if you are making $40,000 and you passed away, whoever you've named as the beneficiary in the URS system would get a check for $30,000, one-time payment. Plus, whoever you have named as the beneficiary for your 401k would get that balance. They'd be able to either spend that or transfer that to their own retirement plan. And by the way, you would have that same balance of 401k as part of the hybrid plan, because there would be a little bit in a 401k as part of the hybrid plan as well. Again, just another reason to make sure that your beneficiaries are set up on our website. Okay, back to the calculators link. Remember, that's on the home screen, urs.org. On the blue ribbon right across the front of the home screen, click on calculators. And then you'd go to the middle section where the piggy bank is and click on the savings plan future value calculator. If you're considering the 401k only or defined contribution plan for the employer's contribution, if you click on that calculator, there will be some inputs that you can put your estimates in or put your assumptions in. And by the way, you'd also want to run this, if you're choosing the hybrid plan, you would want to run this calculator for that smaller 401k piece as well, and then add that amount that it would give you to the hybrid pension estimate. Okay, which plan is right for you? So there is not one right or wrong plan for everybody. A lot of it just depends on your situation and where you anticipate your career and public employment going, and also maybe how comfortable you are with the markets, and how well, let's just go through some of these things that you can consider. If you turn over your handout, if you've downloaded that, or if you go to page 2, there is a column for the hybrid section and a column for the 401k or defined contribution. So the hybrid, one of the benefits of that is it has that guaranteed monthly income for life based on that formula. It can go to a spouse, and it doesn't matter how long you live or what the investment markets do. your check would not stop or go down if something happened in the investment markets. On the 401k side, you have a set amount of money based on the contributions that have gone in and the investment performance, and there's no guarantees as to how long it would last or what that balance might be, because that income is based on investment performance and based on how you choose to spend it. So you do have more control as far as that goes. The hybrid option is considered lower risk because of what I just mentioned with that guaranteed income payment. Because of some of the unknowns with the 401k, mostly what the investment performance would be in the future and how long you might live, that is considered a higher risk option. On the hybrid side, the amount that's going to the pension, that 8.85 in the example, or what's happening this year, that is managed by professional investment managers. You have no say as to how that's managed. So if you're more of a hands-off person with your retirement and you want someone to make most of the decisions for you, that's what happens with that pension amount. With the 401k, after your 4-year vesting, remember you have 4-year vesting in either plan, you are your money manager. So you have full control over which investments you choose. And if you like that idea of being more in control of how your money is managed, then the 401k might be something that the 401k only option might be something that you would consider. That hybrid plan does have that cost of living adjustment. So as things do cost more over time, you do have that little adjustment, potential adjustment up in the pension payment. In the 401k only, there's no COLA or cost of living adjustment, but theoretically, you could pull more money out of your 401k each year. As long as you had something in your account to withdraw, you could change that amount up or down as needed. With the hybrid plan, there is that extra possibility of having a 401k contribution if that pension rate's below 10%. And for this fiscal year, it is 1.15% that's going to the 401k as part of the hybrid. In the 401k only, the full 10%, remember, goes to your salary. Or excuse me, 10% of your salary goes to the 401k. One of the risks with the hybrid plan, remember that example where the pension cost went up to 11, you may be required to contribute to help buy those years of service credit if that rate ever exceeds 10. If you're in the 401k only, that doesn't matter to you. You're not in the pensions, so you would never be required to contribute to the Tier 2 plan. The pension's portable among all URS covered employers. So if you leave your current employer but you stay as a public employee in the state of Utah, and again, as I mentioned, that would be school districts, cities, counties, state, special service districts, water districts, sewer districts, those pension years would still continue to accrue as long as you were in the state of Utah with a public employer. You'd be in that same plan. The 401k on the other side of the page, that's portable among all URS employers, but as well as private sector. So if you leave public employment, you could take that 401k as long as you were vested. You could take the employer's piece and you could move that over to a private sector employer's plan and continue to contribute to it and let it continue to grow. The pension's only available to you after you've met the qualifications. So remember, you have to have a certain number of years, 35 years in the public system, 25 in the public safety fire, or be a little bit older, be in your 60s with a certain number of years. As far as eligibility on the 401k, you can withdraw that at any time upon termination, but the IRS does have some qualifications that you'd have to meet in order to not be penalized on those withdrawals. The hybrid plan does have those guaranteed monthly payout options for spouses. So if you have a spouse that doesn't have an employer or an employer who provides a retirement, you could be earning a retirement that could potentially benefit both of you or continue for that spouse if you were to pass away first. For 401k plans, you can pass on that balance to any spouse or to a spouse or to any named beneficiary. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list of all of the things to consider, but this is a few of the things to consider. Another thing you might want to consider, again, is life expectancy and maybe how long you anticipate being a public employee. Pensions bode well for people that anticipate living a long time because that payment would continue. 401ks bode well for someone who may want to pass on their retirement to someone who might not be a spouse. Because, again, in the hybrid plan, most of your retirement would be in the pension, and the only person that could benefit from that would be a spouse. Whereas on the 401k, you could name dependents or other family members or friends or charity, things like that. Okay, now it's time for that poll question that I thought was coming earlier. So if you go ahead and look at that poll question, it's which of the Tier 2 options requires more active management on your part? So just kind of a little assessment here of either how well I explain things. Wow, I must have explained things really well. It looks like most of you have answered the 401k only or the defined contribution plan, and you are correct. That one does require more active management on your part. After the vesting period, you're in control of the investment options. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Okay, thanks for taking the time to answer that. Okay, this is a screenshot of the URS website, and so right there in the top right, the login is circled. So if you click on that login, it will ask you to create your account if you haven't created your account. And in your first year, every time you log in, you are going to see this screen. And this screen asks you which retirement plan you or which system you want to be in inside the Tier 2 plan, the hybrid or the 401k only. And then the third box there on the bottom is I'm not ready to make my decision. Once you have made your decision, you will still see this screen every day for the first year, and it will say you have chosen hybrid or you have chosen defined contribution. Do you want to keep it or do you want to change your mind? And you can change your mind as often as you want in the first year, but on the day before your 1-year anniversary, whatever's in our system is what's locked in, and there is no going back or changing at that point. And so we want you to log in often during that first year. Go ahead and choose an option, and then if you're not quite sure, now you've got some skin in the game. You can go and talk to a spouse or a significant other about it. You can run those calculators, be thinking about it, and now instead of waiting until you get to the end of your first year and then maybe forgetting, you've got some skin in the game. I would go ahead and try to make that choice fairly soon, and then run those calculators, and again, you can change your mind as often as you want in the first year. But once you get past your first year, you will not see this screen anymore because you won't be able to change your mind or make that decision. And I'll mention this in a minute, but if you don't make a decision, that hybrid is the default. In fact, that's the one that you're automatically enrolled in from day one. Okay, so just summary. Again, for the public employee system, the Tier 2 plan is that the employer will put 10% of your salary, gross salary. It does not come out of your check. It's above and beyond what you're getting paid, and 12% for the public safety firefighter system towards retirement. Both plans have the 4-year vesting. So if you happen to leave before you have 4 years, if you come back within 10 years, you will be able to recapture the monies from the employer in the 401k, but that's only if you leave before 4 years and come back within 10. If you leave before 4 years and are gone more than 10 years, you would lose the 401k piece. So the entire amount from the employer in the defined contribution plan or the smaller piece as part of the hybrid plan. You would never lose your pension years if you've been gone for more than 10 years. Now, if you have at least 4 years, then you're vested and you don't lose anything. And remember, I'm just talking about the employer's contribution. If you contribute to any of the retirement plans, and you can contribute to that same 401k that the employer would be contributing to, your contributions don't have a vesting. Your money is always your money. So remember, on the vesting, we're just talking about the employer's contribution. You do have 1 year to decide. You'll see that decision screen every time you log in the first year. And if you don't choose, the default option is the hybrid plan. And make sure if you do have questions, you can type those in the window, and Corey can get an answer to you as well. Okay, so one of the things to be thinking about, we're going to transition over to the savings plans. Is the employer paid retirement benefit going to be enough? That 10% of your salary, depending on how old you are when you're coming into the system, or if you have been saving previous to coming to a Utah retirement system employer, is the 10% going to be enough? And running those calculators will give you an idea of what that would provide. And for most people, it's probably not going to replace 100% of their paycheck. And so that's why doing some saving on your own part is really important. And so if you want to download or click on that investment options brochure, if you haven't already, we're going to talk about the 4 plans that Utah Retirement Systems offers, where you can put your own money, in addition to what the employer's doing, you can contribute your own money to a savings plan. Utah Retirement Systems offers 4 plans. If you open up to, or I don't know if you have the actual physical brochure, but if you look at page 3 of the brochure, The 4 plans are the 401k, the 457, the traditional IRA, and the Roth IRA. Before we talk about some of those plans, I just want to mention, or I want to show you this slide. I think this slide is very motivating to remember 2 things. When it comes to investing, time is your friend, and the sooner that you can start saving, the better. So that what this graph is illustrating is 4 different individuals who started saving potentially at different times and chose different investment options that affected how their contributions grew. So each person, Julie, Sally, Joe, and Linda, when they start employment, they, at the beginning of the graph, the beginning salary is $30,000, and they receive a 2% salary increase each year. And the assumption, except for Linda, is that Julie, Sally, and Joe would save 15% of their salary annually. And so you can follow the red, purple, greenish, and kind of teal lines there, and you can see Julie, who started saving at age 25 all the way to age 65, so she had 40 years of saving. She invested and earned an average of 6.5% on her investments. She ends up with over $1 million at age 65 to spend in retirement. Sally doesn't quite start saving as soon as Julie. She's still, at age 35, she'd be earning the same wage that Julie was, but now she saves for 30 years instead of 40. She has the exact same investment choice, so she's still earning the same rate, 6.5%. But you can see her amount to spend at age 65 is over $400,000 less, just about $633,000. Joe saves for 40 years, just like Julie. So just like the red line for Julie, he starts saving at the same time frame, but he chooses a different investment option that has a lower rate of return of 2.5%. And you can see how that affects, even though he saved the exact same amount, the rate of return that he earned was was significantly less, and so that affected the amount that he was able to spend. And then Linda saves 5% more of her salary, but she starts 20 years after Julie and Joe. She starts at age 45, and she saves for 20 years. So even though she saved more of her salary for those 20 years, and she earned the same rate of return as Julie, she has less than half of what Julie has to spend because she started later. And again, this shows that 2 things. The earlier you can start saving, the better. Even if it's a small amount, those early years of compounding returns will be to your benefit, and then the rate of return that you earn over time matters as well and can affect the amount that you'd have to spend in retirement. So I think that's just a fun graph to look at and hopefully motivating for getting those dollars in early to save. Okay, so on the employer side, the savings plan contributions, remember if you're in the hybrid plan, 1.15 for public employees, 0.74 goes in for the public safety fire. That's what would go into the 401k. And by the way, that has to go to the 401k. The employer piece as part of the Tier 2 plan cannot go to any of the other 3 plans. It has to go to the 401k. If you choose the 401k only or defined contribution, the entire 10 or 12% for public safety fire would go to the 401k. No years of service credit purchased for the pension. And then we've got the third piece here, you. What can you do to help supplement what the employer's doing? The employer's doing a pretty generous retirement contribution. 10 or 12%, that's a pretty generous contribution. But I would not plan on just letting the employer save or assume that just what the employer's saving is going to be enough to replace what you may want to be spending in retirement. So you can choose some different options in those savings plans that you can receive tax benefits now, or you can have after-tax contributions. The money can grow tax deferred. Let's talk about how those plans are different. And before we do that, let's go ahead and do a quick poll question. So this poll question, okay, poll question is coming. Maybe. Okay, here we go. So have you ever participated in a retirement savings plan before? So have you ever contributed to a 401k, IRA, any kind of savings plan? Okay, thanks for answering. Looks like about 3/4 of you have participated. So some of you may be familiar with how these plans work. some of the rules. Some of you may not if you haven't participated before. So let's just do a brief overview of how those plans work. So as I mentioned on page 3 of the investment options brochure, these are the 4 plans that Utah Retirement Systems offers. And page 3 tells you some of the rules and regulations with these plans. 401ks and 457s are very similar, other than there's kind of one main difference with a 457 plan. And by the way, 457 plans are only available to public employees. So if you came from the private sector, you may be familiar with 401ks. You would not have had the option to participate in a 457 plan if you were or if you had not been in public employment before. At Utah Retirement Systems, you have both. 457 plans, as I mentioned, very similar with one exception, and it is kind of a big exception, and that is if you look in the early withdrawal penalty tax section, there is no penalty tax if you take money out before age 59 and a half. The caveat is you cannot be a public employee in the state of Utah if you're withdrawing from the Utah 457 plan. So if you anticipate leaving public employment, in your 30s or 40s and you want access to the money in a savings plan, the 457 might be a good option. The 401k, traditional IRA, and Roth IRA, unless you meet an exception, you pretty much have to be 59 and a half. And so depending on when you think you may stop working and want access to the plan, if you know you're going to be working past age 60, then the difference between the 401k and 457 may not be, there may not be, much of a big deal between those two. The first 3 plans, 401k, 457, traditional IRA, any money that you put into those goes in pre-tax. So if you look at the top of the screen, you pay taxes when that money comes out. The Roth is the opposite. Any money that goes into the Roth has already been taxed, and then when you take that money out, the contribution that you may have made plus any earnings, it is not subject to taxes. And so you may want to consider that, especially if you have quite a bit of time before you retire, since those earnings aren't going to be taxed. The longer those contributions are earning something, the more that growth can be compounded and can really affect some withdrawals that wouldn't be taxed. Those check marks in the page, that tells you how you can get money in the plans. For the most part, to get money in the 401k and the 457, it has to go through payroll deduction or rolled over from a similar plan type. You'll notice personal deposits, that checkbox is checked for the IRAs because you can write personal checks to those plans. So if you get a tax refund or you get an inheritance, you want to put money into a Roth or a traditional IRA, you can. You cannot write a check to your 401k or 457. That money has to come through payroll. Again, this page tells you how you can put money in, how it's treated tax-wise, what are the rules and restrictions on accessing the money. Down at the bottom of the screen, if you look at the contribution limits, the IRS sets these limits, and you can contribute a lot more to the 401k and the 457 plan than you can to the IRAs. For the year 2018, if you're under age 50, it's the top line. If you're if you're under age 50, it's the top line. If you're over age 50, it's the bottom line. So you can see you can sock a whole lot of money away into those retirement plans. Just to note on the IRAs, it's a combined limit of either the 5,500 or the 6,500. So you couldn't do 5,500 in each or into multiple IRAs at that limit. It would be a 55 or 6,500 combined limit. You can do 18.5 or 24.5 in each of the 401k or 457 plans. So above and beyond what the employer is doing, you can select an amount or a percentage of your check to be saving in these plans. And we would definitely recommend that you start doing that as soon as you can. Okay, another poll question. So if you look at that poll question there, which individual savings plan interests you most? So there's no right or wrong answer, although there may be one that is probably not a good answer down there. Okay, looks like a lot of you are interested in the Roth and the 401k. Nobody's interested in the 411, which I don't even know what the 411 is, so that's good that you didn't choose that. So, okay. And by the way, this is just an overview of those plans on page 3. It doesn't have, all of the details, but I think enough that to get you started. And if you do have additional questions, we do have phone numbers that you can call to ask as well. Okay, some general savings guidelines to consider. Again, what age and when you plan to retire as far as accessing those plans. For the most part, all of the plans are accessible after age 59 and a half. And have you been saving in the past? Do you have any current savings, or are you going to be starting for the first time saving for retirement. So how much do you save? Again, back to the calculators. If you go to urs.org and click on that calculators link, this savings plan future value calculator, which would have been the same one that you would have used with the 401k only plan, if you want to run this calculator with your contributions as well, you can do that, and then it will you would put in an assumption on what you think you would earn, an assumption on how many years you'd want to use it in retirement. Maybe you want to spread it out for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, depending on how long you think you may be living, and when you'd start using the money. And then the calculator will convert the savings amount into a monthly amount, an equal monthly amount that you could spend throughout retirement. The longer you anticipate living, it's going to lessen that amount that you could spend because you'd need to make it last that long. The shorter you anticipate living, it's going to deplete that account at that age. And so if that account goes to zero in 10 years versus 30 years, that's going to make a difference in what you could spend in retirement. Okay, no matter what plan you choose, the 401k, 457, or the IRA options, you get to choose for your own money right away which investment you want to have your money go into. And once you're vested after 4 years, you would choose the investment for the employer piece as well. So which investment mix is right for you? There's a picture of salsa on your screen. And you think of what salsa is comprised of, or how you make salsa. You put in tomatoes and onions and green peppers and cilantro and maybe some other fun things in there. And you probably wouldn't want to just eat a bowl of onions or eat a bowl of peppers or eat a bowl of cilantro. It just wouldn't be very appealing. But when you mix it up together, you get this wonderful thing called salsa. And so with your investments, maybe you want to consider a mix that would be appropriate for you depending on your time frame and your comfort level with the markets. And so on pages 4 and 5 in the brochure, these are the 8 core funds or investment choices that you have, regardless of whether it's any of those 4 plans. You have the exact same investment choices. So sometimes people will say, okay, if I'm going to save $100 a month into my Roth and $100 a month into my 401k, which one will do better? Well, that's really not the right question to ask, because if you picked the balance fund for your $100 in each plan, you would see the dollar amount be the exact same. The difference between the Roth and the 401k, that $100, would be, did I already pay taxes on it, or am I going to pay taxes when I withdraw that contribution? And am I going to pay taxes on the earnings, or am I not going to pay taxes on the earnings? And what age can I withdraw those funds? So the investment choice, could be the same in any of those 4 plans. The difference in the plans, again, are those IRS rules. But if you look at this page, these are listed on the page from most conservative to most aggressive. So the income in the bond fund, if you look at those bars, those represent how the investment did for the last 10 calendar years, 2008 to 2017. And those bars represent the earnings or loss that happened in that investment choice. As you go across the page, you see those bars, a lot more volatility and fluctuation from year to year and how that investment would have performed. Kind of in the middle, right at the top of those colored sections for each investment choice, you'll see if you just had blinders on and you were going back 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, if you average that amount, the returns in that time frame, that would tell you what it averaged. And you can sort of tell sometimes by the name of the fund what it invests in. If you see something named bond or bond fund, if you look at that black font paragraph, it says that it generally contains investment grade and government bonds. So kind of obvious by the name that it invests not in the stock market, but in bonds. If you go over to the right hand side of the page, anything that says stock in the name, that is investing in companies or corporations. If you see the word cap, large cap or small cap, cap is short for capitalization, which means size. So anything that's investing in large cap is large size companies, small cap, small size companies. And so when you're putting in your 5% of your check or $50 a month or whatever your contribution, for your own money, you need to tell us which fund, or you get to tell us which fund you want to be in. Now, going back to that salsa analogy, let's say that you're, a little concerned with making sure that you pick something that would be appropriate. We do have a default option, and these are called target date funds. And what the target date funds do is they kind of do with that salsa analogy. They put a little bit of lots of different things in your investment choice. There are 12 target date funds, and they are named for a year in 5-year increments, in addition to one that's called target date retired. And the concept behind the target date funds is that you would select a target date fund that would be close to the year that you would anticipate using the money. And the target date fund would take your $100 a month or 5% or 10% of your salary, and it would split it up down the column according to the percentages that are in the column below the name. So if I was in the 2040 fund and I was putting $100 a month in, my $100 a month would be split according to the column below the name. So $4 or 4% would go into the bond, nothing would go into the income fund. Remember, we saw the income in the bond fund on the previous pages. Nothing would go into the international, or excuse me, 2% would go, or $2 would go into the international bonds. And then going on down, I would have 4% in the real estate investment trust, or $4 of my 100, $9 in the value, $21 in the index, and so forth. That purple section of stocks, those are the last 5 that we saw on the previous page. That middle category of real estate and commodities, those are just exclusive to the target date funds. So you cannot select those individually, but they are just another asset class as part of the target date funds. So on my account statement, it might say the 2040 fund, so it would show one fund by name, but in reality, I would be using 2, 4, 6, 8, I'd be using 10 different funds for my investment choice. And so when you select an investment choice, if you want to select individual ones, you can, or assuming you're kind of moderate, not too aggressive, not too risky, you could select a target date fund that would be close to the year that you would anticipate starting to use the money. What happens with the target date funds is as that year of your fund gets closer to being the current year or becomes a year in the past, the fund itself will force you out of the stocks or the more aggressive holdings, and it will replace those holdings with the more conservative green color or bonds or stuff that's not in the stock market, doesn't have as much volatility. And that happens automatically. And so if you think of the retirement fund as the shore and these white lines as waves coming into shore, a wave that's 100 yards out is going to hit the shore, like maybe the 2020 fund, a little bit closer or a little bit sooner than maybe the 2060 or 2055 fund. Those waves would still hit the shore, but they're going to take a lot longer to get there. And so if you're in the 2060 fund, it's going to take a lot longer for you to get out of the for your fund to sell out of the stocks and replace it with the bonds, but it would eventually do that as you got older. And so if you were, 25 years old now and you're going to be working for 40 years, maybe you'd want to pick a fund that's closer to 40 years in the future. If you're working for 10 more years and then going to start using your money, maybe you'd want to pick a target date fund that would be, within the next 10 years or so. Okay, so here's another poll question. So if you look on your screen, it says a target date fund means that my individual retirement savings account will be fully funded by the target date. So this is a true or false. I'm just going to watch here. Okay, it looks like pretty much everybody answered false. So I did a really good job of explaining that, and you guys are really smart. So the target date fund doesn't have anything to do with, guaranteeing that your account will be fully funded or have a certain amount. But what it does do is change your mix or your salsa, your investment mix, as time passes and as you get closer to using that money in retirement. Okay, so just wrapping up here, how will you reach your goal? So think of some of the actions that you will take, making your Tier 2 decision. How much are you going to save on your own? Do you need to make any adjustments in what you have been doing? If you have an old 401k or IRA, you can roll that over into the URS plans and start adding to it. And again, choose an investment option for that. Back to the login screen, I'm going to show you some login screens. So the top right corner is where you would create your URS account. And by the way, to create that account, if you have not created it, you need a unique account number that we have created for you. It is on your URS statements, and it is also on some information, an information letter that we have sent you when your employer put you in the system. You will need that account number to create your account. So if you don't have that, you're going to need to call us so that we can resend that to you. But once you get logged in, and after your first year or once you click past that decision screen, this is the landing screen. All of the saving plans are going to be on the left, and you can see you will either enroll in them, and once you have enrolled in them, they will say access. If you click access, this is an example of someone who clicked access to the 401k. All of the navigation is on the left, so that's where you would change your investment choices or change how much you're contributing. So if you look on the left-hand side, that contribution/deferral link is highlighted. I think this has actually been changed, and now it says change contribution. But when you click on that link, there will be some percentages that you can select, or you can select your own percentage or a dollar amount. So this would be if you wanted to start saving in the Roth, or you wanted to start saving in the 401k with your own money. Or this is also where you would turn it off if you needed to stop those contributions. So you can access that through the URS login. You can do everything online with starting or increasing or decreasing or stopping that contribution to any of the savings plans. If you want to sit down with us individually and go over the Tier 2 choice, or you've already made your Tier 2 choice and you want some help with the calculators, or you just want to sit down and have someone here at URS to go over what those estimates may look like in the future, you can sit down with one of the retirement planning advisors on my team. And the way you do that is, once you're in your account, if you click on that last tab called Education, when you click on that, there will be a navigation on the left, and it will say Individual Retirement Planning Sessions. If you click on that link, there will be a calendar of some days, locations, and times that you can select. And we have a rolling 4 to 5 week calendar. And so if you don't see a time that fits with your schedule, keep checking. You can come to these as often as you'd like. They're free. They're either at our URS office in Salt Lake, or we are throughout the state as well. And I think these are really good meetings to take advantage of, because we are basically informing you of the benefits that you already have through your advisor or through your employer, and then what you can do on your own to help supplement that. Okay, so here's your to-do list today. So if you have not created your account, get that created. Again, you need your URS account number, and if you don't know where that is, you can call one of the numbers on the bottom of the screen. Choose the hybrid or the 401k plan, the defined contribution plan. If you're not quite sure, I would say go ahead and make a decision, and now you're going to start thinking about it, because you're going to wonder, did I make the right decision? Come to one of those individual retirement planning sessions. We can go over the options with you, run those calculators. And then probably the most important thing I could tell you is to start saving on your own. Remember that graph where we had the 4 individuals, and the person who started saving sooner ended up with significantly more money than the others who were trying to play catch up down the road. The sooner you can start saving, the better. And that's probably the most important advice I could give you today. I'm going to go ahead, and we're at the end of our webinar. I'm going to turn the time back over to Corey, and I'll let him go ahead and wrap up the last minute or two.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you for your participation here in the Tier 2 Choice webinar. Hope that this was helpful, and that you can rely on this knowledge to select the right plan for you to help you have a prosperous retirement down the road. A couple of other quick notes. We will be sending you an email here in the next few hours with a link to a survey. Please fill out that survey. It just helps us know how effective the presentation was and what we can do to improve that presentation if needed. Also, if you do have any other questions that came up during this session, we'll stick on the webinar for a few minutes here to ensure all your questions were answered, and make sure that you leave here satisfied. So thank you very much for your participation today, and have a wonderful day.